Hello, welcome to another strange episode of Saved by the 90s. My name's Adam Patterson. With me today, we got Ken Bakley. Hey, Ken.
Hello.
This month on the show, we're going to be doing part 2 of our Eerie, Indiana retrospective. So I think with that, we can just go straight in. I don't think we need a preamble here. If you listen to last month's episode, we go through episodes 1 through 10 of the amazing show, Eerie, Indiana. This month, we're going to be capping it off, going through episodes 11 through 19, and then we're also going to be touching on the sequel series, which we didn't watch all of that,
No.
but we both watched the first episode at least, so we'll be able to touch on that, and then maybe give our closing thoughts with the series as a whole. So we're going to start things off with Who's Who. This is directed by Tim Hunter. Now, this one is, we've seen, there's been stories like this before, but essentially Simon and Marshall meet up with this girl who is a very gifted, talented artist, and it turns out that anything she draws and then signs her name on, it becomes real. So... Not entirely a new idea, but I think it's still something that can be there can be interesting things to be had with that idea. The kind of what I believe to be like a staple of the show, they're dealing with topics that more serious adult topics that kids are often forced to be confronted with. So in this case, the girl, her name's Sarah Bob, by the way.
The name is relevant.
Yes, Sarah Bob. She is the only girl in this family of men, and their mom left them, I guess, and the father appears to be a drunk, and the kids are just out of control, and she's forced to be a sister and a mother, and really take care of the dad, too, because let's be honest, he seems to be completely useless. So, yeah, it's kind of, it's dealing with kind of more serious topics like a lot of the other episodes, but done in a more kind of comedic, light way that I think is easy for younger kids to digest.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, a lot of kids in a similar situation would find a lot to relate to here. And I like this episode overall. I think this was a good episode.
Yeah, I think the more that I've been watching through this, since it's my first time watching it, I think there are different ways that each episode kind of approaches the same basic concept. Like, there are some episodes which focus on the town specifically, and are kind of about examining the town and this community through the perspective of introducing supernatural elements to it, and we'll get to those. But there's also episodes that are just very much character driven in a more direct way, and this is one of them. And I think, taken as a whole, it sort of, these episodes, I think, sort of allow, as you say, an episode to discuss subject matter more than maybe overall theme or vibe. And I think the show kind of has a good balance between them. And I don't even think that was a cognizant decision with the show to sort of balance it out this way, but it is something that I did notice as I was going through them.
Yeah, it's not like there's each episode is like dealing with this like serious undertones. It's not really like that. I mean, a lot of the episodes,
there's no hard formula to it.
Right. A lot of the episodes are much more lighthearted, and I mean, while I think a lot of them have subtext, I think that there are some episodes that are just fun and don't necessarily ask to be read into too deeply. But then there are certain episodes that, like this one, that I think you can look at and see that there is something deeper happening here. And, you know, where it goes is fine. I think that this is and we talked about this before last episode about how I feel like the time constraints of this show, like cramming everything into, what is essentially like 20 minutes is, I think it's difficult to do. And I think that they handle it pretty well overall, but I think a lot of episodes just feel like they need to be, or they could be a little bit fleshed out more.
Yeah,
And I think that this is an example of that.
Yeah, something that I feel like has happened to me a lot going through this, maybe to a greater extent than with the first 10 episodes, is just watching them all in a few day time span. They're sort of running together to me, for me, some of them. There are some that stand out, and there is, once again, as I said last month, I've still yet to, well, now having seen the whole thing, there's not a bad episode of the show, but a lot of the ones that are just kind of fine become somewhat indistinguishable with the other ones that are just kind of fine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I completely agree with that. Yeah, that's. Like, I think that's a good sentiment.
I'm not going to have too much to say about the one about the Eerie wolf.
Yeah. Yeah, me neither, really. So, Sarah Bob is played by Chanel Gray in this, and I do recognize her. I don't remember this episode at all, by the way. I'm like, maybe I saw it when I was a kid, but this one I have no recollection of. And this actress she had a pretty large role in The Bold and the Beautiful and One Life to Live, so she was a big soap opera star, but she's also the older sister of what's her name, Ariel Winter from Modern Family. And there was like I ended up like digging into this, and there was like all this family drama where like at one point she got custody of Ariel Winter because like her mom was being abusive, and there was like all kinds of like court battles with her and stuff. I did notice that Chanel Gray also she's a producer. She produced a whole ton of things, and I think that that's because she actually owns or runs an acting school in LA, and it looks like a lot of the stuff that maybe her students made, she has a producer credit on. And she does a lot of voice work too for like video games and stuff like that. So she's got a pretty good career.
Yeah, I just went on her IMDb page that she has 163 producer credits and like a lot of short films, it looks like.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that most of those are from her school that she has. It's like Chanel Gray. I can't remember the name of the school, but it looks like it's still in operation. So good for her.
Yeah.
So that's Who's Who. Pretty decent episode. I feel like it could have used a little bit more. And again, I think that was just the time limitations, but it was a cool concept. They added some CG in this one where like when you tear the art apart, it kind of like tears the whatever it is that you're destroying.
I'm always here for early 90s TV
yeah.
CG.
It felt very if you've seen the show Alex Mack, that's what it felt like. The CG looks very Alex Mack-esque. The other thing with this one is like in addition to her being able to like draw things that become real, like the whole thing here is that she doesn't have a mom. She's desperate to rekindle that relationship with her mom, or just to have a female figure in her life. And so she ends up drawing Marshall's mom and like stealing his mom, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, because like she did it with her family too. So she turned her family into like the family that she wanted, but then she trapped her real family in a fishbowl, which, by the way, how are they not dead? Because they were in a fishbowl underwater.
Well, they're presumably not dead in the drawings, so.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah, I didn't think about that. But at any rate, her family. So when she draws her family, it gets replaced with a new version. But when she draws Marshall's mom, it like literally teleports Marshall's mom to her house. So
Mhm.
why did it not just create a copy of Marshall's mom? The logic isn't there.
Because this is a 23-minute episode, and they needed to get to the high stakes there.
I guess they needed a reason to get Marshall back over there to try to undo what she did. I feel like she could also have just done, because the episode ends with her drawing herself and her mom in Paris, and I feel like she probably could have just done that from the beginning, and everything would have been good. Although it would have been interesting.
Sometimes it takes some time to get to what you should have been doing the whole time.
It would have been interesting because the whole thing was like she didn't remember what her mom looked like, so she couldn't like draw her mom. But then in the Paris drawing, it was like her mom had her back to her. But it would be weird and maybe interesting to see if when she got teleported, her mom just didn't have a face. It was just a blank face.
It's the concept that matters. It's not
it's
the concept of a supportive.
So that's Who's Who. Next up, we have episode 12, Marshall's Theory of Believability. This one's directed by Bob Balaban. This one was okay, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really have much to say about this one.
That makes two of us.
So this one is about this professor, this like traveling professor guy who has like oddities. It's sort of like Ripley's Believe It or Not kind of vibe. He ends up in Eerie and he has like these like crazy things that he shows, and Simon and Marshall look up to this guy, and he announces that there's going to be a UFO that's going to land in Eerie within the next 24 hours. So Marshall and Simon are super excited. They end up finding the object, and then it causes this whole like thing where people are trying to buy the object, but then they find out that like Zircon is sort of a charlatan, but in actuality, like the fake UFO landing was not the one that they found. They actually found the real object. The only thing that I can really say about this one is that I thought the cinematography was interesting. It utilized a lot of really like kind of weird camera angles, and there were a lot of things like obstructing the view. So there were a lot of kind of random things in the foreground, and they used a lot of like POV shots in this one too. So there were a lot of scenes where characters were like talking directly to the screen, which I thought was kind of different. But other than that, this was sort of an average episode, I think. There's nothing really too memorable about this one. And like for me, I think that this was probably one of the weaker ones of the batch that we saw this month.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah, I think we can just...
unlike the next one we're talking about, there are 0 tornadoes in it.
Yeah. So the next one's called Tornado Days. The premise of this one is that every year in Eerie, they do this like Tornado Day celebration, and every year on the same day, a tornado comes through the town, which they don't seem to be like, most of them think it's just a normal thing. Like, oh yeah, that's just the old tornado. What was the name? Old Bob or something?
Yep, Bob. The tornado is named Bob.
And that's just that's just how
Well, by the standards of the town, I think it's pretty plausible.
Yeah, I think so too.
You get used to it.
What'd you think of this one?
I liked it.
I like this one too. It's pretty goofy.
Yes.
You have I can't remember his name, the guy from Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. He plays a meteorologist who
Matt Frewer.
Yeah. He's a meteorologist who creates this machine, this like capsule that allows him to travel with the tornado. So he gets sucked up into the tornado and just travels with it in order to study it. And
He's also Max Headroom.
oh yeah, he's Max Headroom. Yep. But yeah, I thought that this one was kind of fun.
Yeah.
This is another pretty light episode, I think. This one,
yeah, it fits with an episode's about the town as community to be explored.
this one's directed by Ken Kwapis, who did a lot of TV work. He directed a metric ton of TV stuff, including Malcolm in the Middle, Bernie Mac Show, Grounded for Life, Larry Sanders Show, The Office. Did I say The Office? I think I already said that.
Yeah, I know you didn't. It's an interesting set of directors on the show, which I keep thinking about, if for no other reason than because one of them was, as I mentioned last month, Sam Pillsbury, the winemaker who gave that interview in all caps.
which they put in verbatim, which I liked. I like
that a lot. I like that a lot.
Next up, we have Hole in the Head Gang. So this is a pretty big episode.
This is a pivotal one.
Yeah, this episode marks a shift in the whole show, really. So we see the introduction of Dash X, which is a recurring character that they added in this episode, played by Jason Marsden, who you probably have seen this dude in many things back during this time. He's been in a ton of stuff, and he's another pretty big voice actor. He still does a lot of voice acting work. So I'm sure that he's the type of character actor that as soon as you see him, you're like, oh yeah, that kid. So this episode it's about Marshall and Simon investigating this haunted house, this mill, and they end up finding this kid, Dash X, who isn't named until like, I don't know, three or four more episodes. But he's this kind of gruff voiced, gray-haired kid who has these plus and minus marks on his hands, and he has no memory of like who he is, where he came from, any of that. He just kind of appeared in the town, and from this point on, he shows up in every episode. He's a character that shows up and plays a pretty big role in every episode moving forward. This was when NBC wanted to shift the tone of the show and make it a bit more adult.
So they introduced the kid with gray hair.
A little bit on the nose, NBC.
Brilliant work.
Yeah. Another weird side note that was on this episode, because this wasn't even like a central plot point on the episode, but they wrote out the original guy who ran the World of Stuff, and they replaced him with John Aston. And the way that they wrote him out was that it was a guy who was like an imposter. He was like a con man, and he kidnapped the original owner, Radford, and kept him locked up in the basement, and then he took over as the owner of the World of Stuff. And that's
perfectly normal Eerie, Indiana.
Yeah,
stuff.
And that's how they wrote that guy out of the show and replaced him with John Aston. Now, he does come back.
Yeah.
He does come back later.
Easy to write people out of the show.
I know. You just throw him in a straitjacket and be like, yeah, that guy was a crazy imposter. And that's that. So yeah, this episode, big episode, probably one of the biggest episodes as far as like pushing forward the lore of Eerie, Indiana. The episode itself was not great, I didn't think. Like, as far as the main like monster of the week story what you have here is a ghost cowboy where he wanted to rob the Eerie bank, but then I guess he died or got killed before he was able to do so. Or he went to rob the bank, but he forgot his gun, and then they killed him or something. And they helped the ghost, quote unquote, rob the bank by taking a toaster from there. And that's sort of the weekly story.
The town's just going crazy for these toasters.
It's so weird, man. I loved that scene in the bank though, because there was so much going on in that scene. There was like there was a one part where it was like a fisherman that was like depositing his rod or something, and then there's another part where a nun just takes out $1.5 million in cash for no reason. That scene was great. And then, of course, it turns out that the bank teller is actually the imposter guy who was the fake owner of the World of Stuff. Mm-hmm. It's interesting though. Like, I guess the pulling in John Astin was like part of the network's idea of like a mid-season shakeup where they wanted to like pull in another colorful character. And I think that John Astin fits that role like perfectly. I mean, that's definitely the kind of roles that he played. And he's in, I think, every episode moving forward too. The thing is though, like, I didn't feel like he added a whole lot to the series overall. But it's whatever. So yeah, big episode. Then we move on to Mr. Cheney. This one was directed by, by the way, Hole in the Head Gang was directed by Joe Dante. Mr. Cheney is directed by Mark Goldblatt. And this one is the werewolf one. Not a whole lot to say about
I kind of already tipped my hand on this one.
Yeah. So I guess every, I don't know how many years, 10 years or something, they do this like harvest festival, and they announce a harvest king, and the harvest king has to go out in the woods and attempt to find like the harvest, I don't know, the Eerie wolf or the harvest wolf or something like that. Turns out it's a werewolf, and they basically sacrifice. They sacrifice a person like every 10 years or something to a werewolf, which I think is like something that they don't really hammer in enough, or they don't really put enough emphasis on the fact that the town is collectively, not collectively, but the more powerful leadership in the town is knowingly sacrificing a child.
I think they try and use that point to make a not terribly artful comment on political corruption.
Yeah, so Stephen Root is in this, and he plays this guy who we haven't even seen up until this point, and all of a sudden he seems like a big person in the town, and he's the werewolf. And through Dash X being himself, Marshall ends up becoming the Harvest King. And there's this like ceremony that I just couldn't help but think that Ari Aster totally bit off that scene in Midsummer. With the flowers and the crown, like how they put all these flower wreaths on Marshall, and he's like buried in flowers, and then he has that like flower crown. I'm just like, oh okay. I see. Everybody says like the Wicker Man and stuff. I'm like, nah.
It was Eerie, Indiana.
It was this episode of Eerie, Indiana.
So you know how in songwriting now, if a songwriter or a songwriter's estate says that like one part of one song was lifted from another song, they can sue and get songwriter credit and royalties for it. Yeah. What if that was how screenwriting worked? And they just have to, and now from now on, Midsummer has to have a co-writer credit from this episode of Eerie, Indiana. Jose Rivera is now a co-writer of Midsummer.
He's so funny. Yeah, like this episode's not. It's really not bad. It's just nothing. It's just nothing tremendous. The werewolf effects are very pedestrian at best.
Mhm.
I mean, it's like a mask. It's like a wolf mask that you would get at like Spirit Halloween, pretty much. It has a little bit of movement in the nose and mouth, but for the most part, it just looks like a mask. And where it goes is just not very interesting either. So like Marshall ends up getting scratched by the werewolf, and he has a thing where like because it was only a little scratch, every full moon now he just grows sideburns instead of turning into a full on werewolf. And of course, John Aston's character is becomes like a werewolf hunter in this and helps them. It's fine.
Yeah,
nothing amazing.
Like I said, what it builds up to is like that conversation between them and the mayor about how.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
So in addition to the sacrifice, in addition to causing a good harvest, lowers taxes.
Yes.
Don't ask me how, but
yeah,
it lowers taxes. So you feed a kid to a werewolf, the town's taxes become lower. I don't know how it works, but they didn't. They didn't explain it.
Conversation with the mayor. It's like you don't tell people. People don't ask. You don't say anything. And it's like that's Eerie, Indiana talks about small town and endemic corruption.
Yeah. And next up, we have No Brain, No Pain. This one it's a brain swap. It's a brain swap story.
This is quietly maybe the second most chaotic episode of the show we're going to talk about.
This one, it's a classic brain swap scenario where you have this Simon and Marshall and Dash X. They stumble upon this homeless man who seems very mentally ill, and then they find out that he was actually like the smartest man in the world, and he had this machine that could like transfer consciousness, and he accidentally transferred his consciousness to an 8-track tape of the Knack, and through a series of events, Simon ends up getting the guy's brain, and then through another series of more events, everybody's brains get scrambled at one point.
Mm-hmm.
And it turns out that the guy's wife was like evil, and she wanted to like sell the technology to the military or something. He wanted to use it for good. Sorry, go ahead.
You can also tell that they're trying to expand the audience of the show by having what I can only describe as a shocking number of jokes about 1980s political scandals.
This is where the show starts to get a bit political. And it's very interesting because they make a George Bush joke, first of all, which because when the scientist guy comes back, he's like, who's the president? And Marshall's like, oh, it's George Bush, and vice president is Dan Quayle. And he's like, I can't remember what his line was, but he's like, oh, it's so much worse than I thought. And then they make another. So it turns out what his wife wanted to do was she wanted to sell the technology to steal the 1980 election by putting MacGyver's brain into Ronald Reagan, which would then quadruple his IQ. So
I believe they also get an Edwin Meese reference in there too.
So yeah, this episode is certainly one of the more bonkers ones. face value for this, it's fine. It's another episode that's just fine, but it's just those one-liners. It's those little one-off jokes that clearly kids will just go straight over their heads. But it's like NBC was slowly trying to get older audiences, I guess, to find this, to be interested in this or something. But yeah, it's not.
You're telling me you didn't like the Edwin Meese joke as a kid, Adam?
Yeah, and this one, it's the beginning of the political jokes, but it's not the end. Like,
no.
Like I feel like this. It's almost as if this show kind of wears its political affiliations on its sleeve a little bit.
It's a show that was trying to reinvent itself in its last 3 episodes.
Yeah, which is kind of interesting.
Choice.
It's kind of interesting, but yeah, it's an okay episode. I liked this episode. Honestly, I didn't mind the inclusion of the Dash X character. Like, I thought it was fine. He annoyed me. Like, the voice, the kind of like gruff voice that he would do, like, that kind of bothered me. But the character, I thought it was actually a good character. Like, he's a pretty complex character for this type of show. And I liked, how he was not he wasn't immediately like one of the protagonists. He's he's kind of in the middle. Like, he kind of plays both sides sometimes. And yeah, I like that character. I think it was a good inclusion overall. I could have used probably another, if they made him a girl, I probably would have preferred that. I think that this show lacks a certain representation.
Yeah.
And now, to be clear, like, I think that this show was pretty good for its time, like, as far as being like, not skewing on gender per se, especially the mom character would always kind of poke fun at the more kind of misogynist, the patriarchal system that is in place in Eerie. And I think that she even mentions it in the next episode that we're going to talk about.
Yeah.
So I think I think it was good, but I also think that there's a serious lack of diversity in this show. Like, anyone of color in this show is pretty much an extra. Like, you see, there are people of color, but they're all in the background for the most part. So, I mean, I guess that's just sort of a product of its time. But I don't know. It's weird seeing just such a sea of white in a show like this.
Yeah. I just think on a direct level, I don't think a show being made now.
No.
Yeah, no.
Definitely wouldn't. And one could argue, like, towns like this probably didn't have a lot of people of color, and I think that that's an excuse that a lot of these kind of, casually racist people, like, they'll say something like that, where it's like, well, towns like this didn't have black people in them. But it's like, that might be true. I mean, I grew up in a town where it was like 95% white people, but it's like, this is Eerie, Indiana. It's a fictional.
It's fiction. You can literally do whatever you want.
Exactly. So let's.
I did like that you tried
here.
to. I was about to say you're going to get an email with that exact.
Oh yeah.
With that exact thing in it.
Yeah.
With that exact complaint in it.
Yep. So let's move on to the next episode, Loyal Order of Corn. So this is one that in Eerie, there's like this secret society of men. It's like a moose lodge or an elk lodge or one of those other lodges. But this it's way more goofy because it's corn related, which I think is funny. So Marshall's dad joins this order, this lodge, and right off the bat, Marshall sees that there's something weird going on with this place. And of course, Dash X is involved. He actually got a job at the lodge as like a I don't know, a bar back or something like that. I don't know if it'd be legal. I mean, he's working behind the bar, but I don't know if it'd be legal to have a like a 14-year-old kid serving drinks or
No.
whatever he was doing. But they quickly find out that the bartender of this place is seen in these photos from lodge members all the way back to like the early 1900s. So they're like, okay, well, something's clearly wrong here because this guy's been around for like 100 years or whatever. And it turns out the guy's an alien, and he's like an alien explorer, and he got trapped. His species developed this portal technology, and when he went through the portal, it broke. So now he's been trying to fix this portal for like several hundred years or something, or 100 years, and yeah, and they employ Marshall's dad to help fix the portal because Marshall's dad is like, I don't know, he's like an engineer or something. And this episode's decent. Don't have a lot to add with it. We get a little bit of backstory about Dash X, like where he came from on this, because this alien race, they all also have the like plus and minus symbols on their hands. So it seems like maybe that's where he comes from. But they don't explain they don't explain anything beyond that. And that he was going to take over the bar when this guy goes back to his planet after the portal gets fixed.
I think this is an instructive episode in the sense that it is an example of what I was talking about earlier in terms of episodes that kind of pull at the strings of small town ephemera or kind of satirizing it and being able to give it that specifically Eerie, Indiana kind of spin on it. Because, you know, it's just this sort of extremely important to the town's culture, but extremely inexplicable secret society. And I just want to give incredible props to just that scene where they just go all in and just throw corn puns everywhere.
I love the fact that when they first introduce them in the lodge, they all have their corn hats on, which, by the way, like, brainwash them, sort of. Which was very briefly, like, brushed off. Like, it was explained and then quickly brushed off. But then they all have giant bowls of popcorn, and they're just, like, shoveling popcorn in their mouths the whole time. Yeah, so that's the Loyal Order of Corn. Get a little bit more information about Dash X in this one, but not a whole lot. Also, like, it's funny how, like, they immediately take John Astin's character and, like, he's involved in everything now. Like, he's one of the leaders of the town. And it's like, how much time has passed here? Like, I feel like people would still be kind of in shock that he's, like, back, you know? That because he's been presumably been kept captive for, like, a really long time. It's just weird. It's that whole thing.
This show is secretly really great deadpan comedy, I think.
It is. And
yeah. You don't think of it as the first association, but it is.
That's one of the great things about this show is that, like, when you start to, like, deconstruct the episodes and, like, peel back the layers, like, it sort of just opens up all of these, like, really kind of wild concepts and conversations that can be had about it. But the sad thing is that they just weren't around long enough to really dive into a lot of this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So moving on, we have Zombies in PJs. This is the second to last episode that we're going to talk about, at least. This one's directed by Bob Balaban also. By the way, The Loyal Order of Corn was directed by Brian Spicer. This one is another sort of critique on consumerism. The kind of funny thing about this one is the world of stuff is, I guess I don't know if they're having like money problems or something. And this guy shows up and he's called the Donald. Now, I have to think that is a reference to Donald Trump.
Yeah, by 1992, I cannot imagine that was an accident.
Yeah, I think it has to be a reference to Donald Trump.
Mhm.
So the Donald shows up and he meets up with John Astin's character Radford, and they strike a deal to uh, turn around business and sell all their stuff. Dash X gets hired to help sell this stuff in the world of stuff, and through, I guess, sort of like subliminal messaging, it turns everyone in the town into these like these shopping zombies who at nighttime when they go to sleep, they sleepwalk into the store and buy everything. And not only that, but they buy it on credit, and they have to sign these like credit contracts, which, as it turns out, and I think most people would probably be able to easily figure this out, they're signing their souls over to the devil.
It's in the fine print. It's in the fine print so fine that it's disguised, I believe, as the period at the end of the sentence.
Yeah, they have to. Yeah, Marshall and Simon, and I guess it was Dash X was also working with them at that point. They have to look at it under a microscope, and they find
some excellent prop comedy involving fine print.
Yeah. I really liked this episode. I thought that this was a really fun episode.
It's not exactly subtle, but neither is what it's talking about.
It's not. There's even one part when I think Marshall confronts John Astin's character about it, and he goes, "There's nothing going on here but a little harmless capitalism." And of course, that one line just kind of says everything about it. And at one point,
you almost feel like they're pausing right after it.
Yeah, at one point, so after they completely clear out the world of stuff, the Donald gets him to load onto a bus to go to the mall, and you see cleverly it changes, the sign on the bus changes from mall to hell. So
it's very subtle, you know.
Yeah. As far as subtlety goes, this is probably one of the least subtle episodes in the show, but I thought it was also kind of fun how blatant it was.
Yeah.
This is also a bunch of these episodes in the latter half I just don't remember seeing as a kid. So this was another one that I had no recollection of. But it's good. It's really good.
Fun. It's a fun time.
Finally, the last episode, we have Reality Takes a Holiday. This one is directed by Ken Kwapis. This is maybe my favorite episode.
Oh, yeah.
In the whole show.
Probably mine, too.
Just because I'm a sucker for meta stuff, and it gets meta. And I kind of appreciated it because back in 91, you didn't have a lot of stories that got like super meta like this. You know, it's almost like a Wes Craven's New Nightmare situation here. But or what's no, anyway. So what you have here is the morning starts like any other for Marshall. They're at breakfast, they're eating. They're trying to get Marshall to go see a horror movie, and I guess he's like feeling like I'm a big kid. I'm a teenager. I don't need to be hanging out with my parents anymore. You know, I'm gonna do grown-up kid stuff. And so he says no, that he doesn't want to go to the movies. They leave, and then he checks the mail and he finds that it's a script for that episode of Eerie, Indiana. And as he pages through it, he finds that everything that they said in their conversation at breakfast was written down on the script. When he goes back into the house, his family and Simon are sitting there at the breakfast table again. And then he realizes as he turns around that they're actually on a soundstage. They're on a set. And Joe Dante's in it, and he's directing them. And they all start calling him Omri, because Marshall's played by Omri Katz. So they all start using their real names. And Marshall realizes that he's like stuck in this kind of alternate universe, which is our real world, and has to figure out how to get back. And I just love that concept. I thought it was really fun. It's a really good episode.
There's lots of fun stuff in here. Just the he has to go, write himself out of the predicament that he's finding himself in.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
of course, Dash X is here.
Mm-hmm.
And the interesting thing about him,
yes,
in this is that he's his he's not the actor playing Dash X. He is Dash X.
Dash X.
And so he knows that Marshall is in this predicament, but he's like in this world too. And what he does is he convinces, what's his name?
Jose Schaefer. They combine
the two
names,
the two creators of the show. So he convinces Jose Schaefer to write Omri Katz or Marshall out of the show by having him get murdered. And so Marshall has to figure out a way to fix this because he thinks that he's going to get murdered in real life. And it was just it was a fun episode. It was really I think I kind of understand that this was like the one that they ended on,
mm-hmm.
rather than that other episode, The Broken Record.
Mm-hmm. Which looks like
this feels like a more fitting end of the show, even if it was a season ender.
I was trying to figure out. This is the one that confused me because I assumed for a show that seems to want to, as I said, reinvent itself in its last 3 or 4 episodes, this one felt like the kind of thing you do if you're not sure if you're coming back.
Yeah.
I was not sure if they knew that this was it or not.
I don't know. It almost seems like they had an idea that this was going to be it, because it just feels like the end of a series. It really does. The way, because at the end he says like, I'm Marshall Teller, and the way that he kind of ends it off with the narration the same way that the show began in the first episode. So it's
very bookend feeling.
Yeah, it does feel like it is kind of an end point, which is odd because this was not the last episode that was shot. It's not the last episode that was aired. The Broken Record was the one that they ended up airing on Disney after Disney started running the show. So I'm not sure what happened there, but either way, I think it's a fitting conclusion to the show, and I think that it's a good way to cap off the series. I think it's unfortunate. I think it's still unfortunate because I think that the show could have gone on and been successful for, more seasons.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was just in a weird spot.
Yeah.
Like running at 7 p.m. on Sunday?
It was like a Sunday night thing.
It was like Sunday night at 7
or
something.
Sometimes starts earlier on Sundays.
It was
awkward.
Yeah, because it kind of straddled the line between like a kid show and a tween show, and
I would have to imagine that the marketing from the network on this was terrible, because I can imagine them not having any idea who the show is supposed to be for.
Yeah, I mean they're making like Dan Quayle jokes, and they're the one episode, the werewolf episode, they made a Twin Peaks reference where he goes, I'm not the log lady, and there's like stuff like that, but then there's like other kind of goofy stuff that's like very kid centric. So yeah, I think that it was just a communication thing. Because I mean, critically, the show was very well received.
Yeah.
So it had to be just a communication thing, just a marketing thing, which is unfortunate. But other channels, like when it moved over to Fox and played on Fox Kids on Saturday, like early afternoon, that's when it really exploded, and that's what ended up causing that Fox to create a new series, which is called Eerie, Indiana, The Other Dimension, which neither of us, we mentioned it last month, neither of us never even heard of this. Like,
No, you
had,
brought this to my attention one day, and
I had no idea that this was a show that existed. So interestingly, so this aired in 1998. It began in 1998. It's a completely different cast. It's like a whole different thing. That's why they call it The Other Dimension. But the interesting thing, and I didn't know this before watching the pilot episode, was that it's like they try to connect the two. Like,
yeah,
Marshall and Simon end up contacting these two new characters, Mitchell and Stanley, and like tell them that this like rift opened up in their version of Eerie, and the weirdness is like spilling through. And so these two new kids are just starting to experience like the weird stuff happening in their version of Eerie.
yeah. It's I went directly, as I was telling you offline, I went directly from watching the last episode of Eerie, Indiana, which is very much about the show breaking out and examining itself as a show. And I went right from watching that to watching the first episode of The Other Dimension, which is about the new show breaking out and examining the other show. And
Yeah.
I had I wasn't ready. It was a very difficult time for me.
Yeah. To be clear, I don't think that Simon and Marshall were actually in this. I think that they used some kind of footage from an episode of the other show. Because when you like, it doesn't quite sound like them, and it like their voices didn't match up with their mouths. So I don't think that they were actually in it. I think that they used footage from the other series. But I think it was kind of a cool way to connect the two. I think, and honestly, I didn't hate the first episode. I thought that was going to be really bad.
No.
Because like the cover looks awful with like the UFO thing. Just looks so cheesy. And I was like thinking about the other Fox Kids stuff that was coming out around that time, like the Goosebumps show and some of those other ones where like it just, everything felt super cheap and like didn't have the same level of complexity or deepness that the original series had. So yeah, I was kind of surprised that, I mean, it's definitely not on the same level as the original one. I can tell that from the first episode. Now, maybe they do deal with some heavier topics and concepts, but something tells me they don't. I think that they probably took the weird, goofy aspects of the original show and brought that over, and then probably left behind anything that was like, getting into serious territory or subtext.
Did you watch more of this?
No, I didn't. Only watched the first one. Did you see any of the other ones?
No, I did.
The whole series is on YouTube, I believe.
Yeah, it's 15 episodes. It's almost as long as the first one was.
Yeah. I don't think that I will continue watching it. I just don't feel like I need to. I doubt that there's any other. Like, I see what they're doing. They're at least the first episode of this is basically it's sort of like a carbon copy of, it's like a facsimile of the original series. So
it feels like a remake, which is what it is, basically.
Yeah, it doesn't, they try to make it like sort of a sequel or continuation, but it's a remake. Like, you have the same type of stuff, like Elvis that lives in the town and Bigfoot, and like in the original one you had those basketball players that were all like in sync all the time, and here you have like cheerleaders. I did think it was interesting, that scene when they all sat down and got like the root beer floats or whatever, and then they put on the latex gloves to drink them. So it does seem like there's some kind of weird stuff in this, but I also don't think you have the same pedigree of people behind the camera on this one. Now, I didn't look to see who. I might have just lied, but I didn't see, because I haven't seen who directs these. So maybe, yeah, I'm not seeing any like, Joe Dante, Bob Balaban's on here, and I could just tell already that the family is not going to be nearly as relatable, and I don't think that I would connect on the same level as the original. The characters just seem far less endearing. Like the parents seem more like, stereotypical kids show, 90s kids show parents.
Yeah.
Where you don't really have any kind of respect for them or anything, and they're just losers. They're just loser parents.
Yeah, they feel like non-entities.
Yeah, whereas in the original show, the parents were like actual fleshed out characters that you could relate to and were likable. The same with the sister. Like the sister in the original series, played by Julie Condra. Interesting side note: she's married to Mark Dacascos. That character, like, she was a good character in that show. Whereas the sister in the new series, Other Dimension, I think that, again, this is just basing it off of one episode, so I can't say for sure, but she seems like an awful character. But who knows? Maybe she has some kind of deep arc that occurs throughout the first season.
Maybe. I don't know. I mean, it doesn't look like from this first episode that many people go through an arc.
No, probably not.
I mean, in the first episode of the original Eerie, Indiana, there was a feeling that like these characters were going to exist on their own, where you do not get that same feeling here.
Yeah, and I think that certainly there was some growth with the characters in the original. I think that more so Simon and Marshall. I just don't think that they had enough time to fully flesh out the parents and the sister and stuff. I think they would have. Like, I feel like that they had enough of a presence in the show that they if they were allowed to continue, if they picked it up for another season, that they would have continued to develop those characters. It's just a shame. I really would have. I would really like to see like where they would go with the show.
Two things. Yeah, I agree. And two things, because I just had two thoughts kind of happen simultaneously. The first one is, you mentioned Mark Dacascos, and I then had to spend the next several moments trying to figure out what exactly the association was there. And now I remember. He was in Only the Strong.
Oh, heck yeah, he was.
For the show. I don't know why it took me a minute. Like, you said, it was like, yeah, that's a name. And then it's like, oh, that's someone who we should know about on this show. The second thought I have, unrelated, but related to this episode, is I kind of liked the concept of this episode. We didn't really talk about the plot of it, but it's this idea that it's basically a commentary on the joke about there being too many channels on television that would have been prevalent by this point with cable and satellite. And I kind of like that as a concept, just because it's this strange kind of buffer zone of like media, like ubiquitous, like overwhelming volume of media, but before the internet kind of made it all ubiquitous, overwhelming media, just the way that it felt like the world worked.
Yeah.
Like, well, I just like that. Like, there's like this great period of ephemera of like maybe 90s era trying to grapple with it, that of too many TV channels, that I think is interesting. 2,000
channels. You gotta love TV shows that criticize people for watching too much TV, you know?
Yes.
Like, because that's what this does. Like, everybody in Eerie gets these like satellite dishes that pick up all these crazy channels, and they all become like zombies watching. They like become addicted to the TV, and they can't stop watching it.
If they should become zombies for anything, it should be the great deals that you have at the World of Stuff.
Exactly. Buy yourself a Elvis lamp and a disguise kit that like completely changes your voice and everything about you, your height, everything.
Oh God, what a perfect ending to that episode it was.
Yeah, we didn't mention that. The big reveal with the episode with the Donald was that Marshall disguised himself, and it was like a Mission Impossible style disguise where it was like he was literally a different person, and he tricked the demon into
literally just made him literally just made him spontaneously descend back into hell.
He was like trying to get, because he was pretending to be an IRS agent, and he was coming to perform an audit, and he scared the demon back down into hell.
Fascinating, by which I mean not very good CG effect.
Oh man. Yeah. It was like sinking down into the floor. It
was digging through the floor tiles.
It was very bad, and very bad, but incredible at the same time. Anything else you want to add about like the series as a whole?
I think it's telling that we ended our discussion of the one episode of the spinoff by talking about an episode of the original series.
Yeah. I mean, look, it wasn't. I thought it was going to be a dumpster fire. I thought it was going to be so
it was
bad.
fine.
And the first episode, it's fine. Like, again, I don't think I'll be continuing to watch it, but it wasn't that bad.
No.
Maybe it gets bad. Maybe it goes the other way and gets really bad. I don't know.
It could.
But I
probably won't find out.
I like to leave the franchise here on a high note, so I can think back fondly. This also seems like something that is due for a reboot. Like I don't understand why like Netflix hasn't looked into rebooting this, or Hulu. I'm kind of surprised that they haven't. And maybe they have. Maybe the idea's been pitched around, but I feel like this would be a good one to reboot if they did it right. Because I feel like shows of this tone, I think, are able to flourish a lot more now than they were back then.
Yeah.
If you look at the Chilling Adventures of Sabrina on Netflix, I think that's a really good example, because that's a show that seems like it would be for a younger audience, but it contains a lot of really heavy, kind of more adult content. And I think that like there is a space for it now.
Mm-hmm.
So I would love it if they, as long as, again, like if they brought back Joe Dante to be like a creative consultant on it, that'd be really cool. Because I feel like that this series works really well within Dante's mind, like his creative mind. A lot of these episodes, even if they weren't written or directed by him, kind of feel like they have his stamp on them a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it'd be really cool if they like were able to get him back involved. But yeah, who knows? Wishful thinking, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, what we still have here is still really good and worth seeing, I think. Like, not all the episodes are tremendous, but all of them are well done and entertaining and always interesting. So I'm very happy. Yeah.
Not a single bad episode, I will say that.
I'm very happy that I finally got a chance to watch.
And again, the whole series is on YouTube except for that one episode, which is available on Amazon Prime. Mm-hmm. So you can check out the whole series for free. And same with The Other Dimension, if you want to give that a look. That's on YouTube as well. So there you have it. That is Eerie, Indiana. That's the retrospective. Let us know if you want us to do more of these. There's other shows that I might want to dive into. I was thinking about this show Maniac Mansion,
Hmm.
That was on USA, and like I barely remember that show, but I think it's interesting because it was based on a video game, and it was another kind of weird show that I was thinking about maybe looking into. So maybe that's
I
one
like
we could,
I like talking about TV.
yeah, so do I. I think it's a nice little like retreat from the movies, but next month I'm sure that we'll be getting back into the movies because it's going to be Halloween,
Halloween, yeah.
so I'm sure that we'll be doing something really fun for that. I can't wait.
Mm-hmm.
I've been watching some 90s horror movies recently, and I'm just really excited to jump back in. We don't know what our topic's going to
Yeah,
be yet,
I mean, if
but
you see anything that you think works, let me know. I mean,
I'm sure we'll devise something, but
yes.
that's going to do it for this month. Thank you so much for listening. You can send us your 90s topics to 90s@filmpulse.net. You can send us a DM on Twitter or Facebook at 90spod. If you would, consider giving us a review on iTunes, that'd be great. Until next month, for Ken Bakley, my name's Adam Patterson, and this has been Saved by the 90s.
Bye, everyone.